You'd think this would be a bit heavier. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Broken Meeple. Remember, if you like what you see, please remember to leave a thumbs up and a comment. It means the world to me to know that you appreciate the content. And of course, remember that the Patreon campaign is always ongoing if you want to support the channel even further. So yeah, we're taking on the monstrosity today, and I'm a little bit late to the party with Descent Legends of the Dark. And well, to be fair, I wasn't actually planning to review it, because to be honest, what essentially happened was I thought, you know what, I don't think I've got time to devote to this one. I don't think I want to pay the big price for it and that, and I couldn't get a review copy for either, so I thought I'll just leave it be. Other people were reviewing it, and I thought, you know what, I can't do everything. And then at the very last minute, Asmodee basically said, we got a spare copy, do you want it? Okay, fine. So I had to basically find some time to devote the hours into this box, because it's quite a lengthy one to say the least. But I thought, you know what, people wanted to know what my thoughts were, and even though I'm late to the party, hopefully my opinion is still something you want to hear. Now, I'm going to stipulate before this review starts, though, that I have not played the entire campaign of this. I still have to finish it, but I have played the majority of it. I believe the campaign is something like 16 to 18, like 15, 16 odd missions, and I've done at least 10. So I've done the majority of this campaign, and I just need to do a few more to finish it off, and that's good enough for me, I think, to do a review. Yes, I can't comment on how good the ending is, but if you're not enjoying the game after 10 plays, like 10 scenarios, I don't think you're going to enjoy the game for the last 3 or 4. It's, you know, come on. I don't watch a 3-hour movie to hope that the last 10 minutes are good. So now with that little caveat set in motion, we can get on with it.
Get on with it.
Forge your own legend together with friends as you adventure across the vibrant fantasy realm of Terranoff in the cooperative dungeon-crawling board game Descent Legends of the Dark. Powered by an integrated free companion app, Descent Legends of the Dark puts you in the role of a budding hero with their own playstyle and abilities. Together with your unlikely companions, you'll begin an unexpected adventure. An adventure told across the 16 quests of the Blood and Flame campaign. Throughout your campaign, you'll face undead lurking in the mists, demonic barbarians stalking in the wilds, and even more terrifying threats. With 46 pieces of 3D terrain and 40 hero and monster miniatures to draw you into the game, your greatest adventure is yet before you. Your objectives will change from quest to quest as you follow the overarching story of the campaign. Core gameplay mechanisms such as combat, fatigue, skills, items, and more have received completely new interpretations with Legends of the Dark, while a new approach to scenario layout and 3D terrain creates striking multi-level scenarios. As well as the classic deal of throwing dice and killing monsters, the unique selling point of this one is that your characters, your skills, and your weapons and armor have double sides to them, allowing you to flip over between them during the mission in order to either remove fatigue or just switch between different playstyles depending on what the mission will throw at you. The app also brings new changes to gameplay, introducing enemies with adaptable strategies, complex status effects, and also the ability to develop your heroes based on the choices you make in scenarios. In between scenarios, you'll be able to craft new items, upgrade your weapons, and find out more story points about the various characters within the game. Because of these various differences, Descent Legends of the Dark is not compatible with Journeys in the Dark or its previous expansions. 16 scenarios await you. Do you have what it takes? Should you even get started? Let's find out in more detail. So starting with duration, these scenarios do take a long time to play. This is not a pick up and play, easy to get into, like, oh, I just fancy a quick adventure, let's get it out and beat up some monsters. Hell no. This is long, very long. And I'm not even talking about the scenarios, I'm talking about the whole thing in general. Firstly, I've played this campaign entirely solo, but I'd also played the first couple of missions several times with different groups at different multiplayer accounts. I played the demos at the UK Games Expo, I also played with a friend of mine in their kind of smaller campaign to just get it going until someone replaced me, and then I played through this slot solo. And regardless of the player count, the game is long. You are taking at least a good 90 minutes with a solo scenario typically, because the scenarios are quite long in what they do, and with more players you're going on for 2 hours, 3 hours, it can go on for stupid lengths of time. A friend of mine plays a 4-player campaign at a games club, on my games club night, And there are times when the place is shutting down after a 4-hour window and they haven't finished the scenario.
Huh? Oh, nodded off for a bit there.
It's ridiculous how long this game can go with 4 players when you factor in the stuff in between missions and all that. Wow, this is not quick, much like other dungeon crawls of this nature. And it's not helped by the fact that you have to spend a long time setting this game up. Like, a long time. Wow. I mean, you put stuff in the box, I'm actually scared to get it out of the box again. Because you not only have to, well, I mean, firing up the app is easy, but it's that terrain. That terrain is a double-edged sword. Yes, it looks sort of cool. We'll get onto more detail on that later, but it looks sort of cool to be on the table and visualize what you're doing. But when you've got to assemble that all the time in every scenario, it gets very repetitive and tedious very quickly, and that takes a decent amount of time. In fact, you kind of roll your eyes at points when you've been for a scenario for already a good hour or so, and speaking from a solo perspective, you've already been in it for a lot of time, you think, right, we've got to the end, this is the last bit on this like current layer of terrain, we're good. And then suddenly it's like Act 2 of the scenario you're doing, now set up this multi-layered monstrosity of terrain and pillars and overlays and stuff. Is like, give me the box. You know, it does get repetitive, and that takes time. It's not a pick up and play adventure, and then you've got to put it all away in the box, and that takes a while because you've got all the terrain pieces that you've got to dump in the bottom of it. You've got all your character sheets, the fatigue tokens. You've got to obviously not lose the different cards you've got, whatever skills they've got. You know, the app tracks a lot of this stuff, but you still have the physical cards and the components and everything that you need to get out. So I would have liked this to have been a much quicker affair, not only in playing the game, but also in just setting up and putting the thing away when you're done. Moving on to ease of play, you get 2 books in this thing. One lore guide, and I'll give you $5 if you actually have read this all the way through, because I certainly haven't. But, you know, Terranov is a pretty generic fantasy world, if you ask me. But then you've got a pretty sizable rulebook here, and it does look a little bit daunting. But it's written pretty clearly. I didn't have many FAQ moments. There's a lot of pictorial examples in here, and to be honest, most of it is taken care of by the app. When you play the first mission, it is a tutorial mission, although it does go on quite for a long time. But it teaches you the basics of interacting with bits of terrain, fighting an enemy, what weaknesses mean, how your character works, what fatigue does, how to build various bits of terrain, the story choices that you do. And then it runs you through the bits in the city once you're done. But every rule that's in the game is represented in this rulebook as well, with examples. And you've got the quick reference on the back. It's not quite as simple as other games that have tried this, but it's still relatively straightforward. I wouldn't throw a new gamer in front of this in any way, shape or form, but even a reasonably light gamer who hasn't played that many adventure style games could probably get into this with a little bit of maybe slow play on their first couple of scenarios, but then they'll get into it. The tutorial is a good solid length mission that goes over a lot of what you're gonna find in the game, and so props to that. And a lot of that comes down to the app itself. The app is a great design and definitely the kind of like the highlight of where the focus of this game is. The app tracks your inventory, and there's, you know, you gotta have your cards out, but it tracks what you should have in terms of potions and that. It tracks all the materials you've picked up, which you use to craft different recipes. It's an easy to use interface. You basically just sort of click, like, well, not click even, you just sort of tap, hold, drag an arrow to various things from a character to say, I want to do this. This character, the elf or whatever, wants to attack that enemy, wants to interact with that bookcase. And it's pretty easy. It's explained on screen. You can get little tooltips to help you as well. It comes up with little music and that. It's a very good design. Now, you can't just learn this with the app and the rulebook on their own. You kind of need them to work in a symbiotic relationship with each other. We are Venom. In order to really grasp the game. The app will teach you the majority of what you need to know, but you're going to need the rulebook to fill in a few blanks here and there. Now for tactics and strategy, this is where things kind of take a little bit of a downhill turn. It's not the most in-depth adventure game I've ever played here. Very much, even though you've got this app and you've got like little weaknesses on enemies that you can exploit, which, you know, they're safe, so once you know that a bandit is weak to piercing, you know that for life basically. But other than that, it's basically go forward, kill things in sight. Occasionally you get a puzzle thrown at you, or some little like hint of an RPG element thrown in. But they're pretty minor and not difficult to figure out at all if you're paying even the remotest bit of attention. But in most scenarios, it's a case that you go forward, oh, there's an enemy, I better go blat it. You know, you're not gonna run away from it, and you're certainly not going to like leave it be. It's gonna come and get you, so you might as well go kill it first. When you get a group of enemies, it's the same strategy to basically gank on one enemy, take it down, gank on the next, gank on the next. It's the same strategy and tactics throughout pretty much the entire game, no matter how much this game tries to throw at you. Wow, I mean, the tutorial mission is perfectly doable, not very difficult at all. Even the boss in it is fairly straightforward to kill. Wow, does it take a little bit of a difficulty spike as soon as you start doing the first couple of missions though. I mean, the second mission I was in, it's like, are you kidding me? I've got to fight that thing with basic stuff? It's like, that's insane. And even the few missions after that, you start noticing that the difficulty really does ramp up. Honestly, play this on normal mode and stick to that. Don't play this on hardcore or insane or whatever they've got on there above it, because I think you're just gonna get punished unduly. The enemies get to crazy levels of hit points and resistances and even just the damage they deal. So you're chucking dice and killing enemies. Okay, so where's the unique part? Well, it's all about the flipping of the cards and various other things. Your weapon has double sides, so you've got a melee weapon and a ranged weapon perhaps. So you might go in with a bow, but you also have a nice like couple of daggers that you can use. And what you have is an ability called prepare, which basically allows you to start thinking about flipping over the cards or your hero character sheet. And as you use various abilities, you might have to put fatigue on various cards that you've got. And then once you have a chance to flip the card, you can essentially go whoop, flip the card, and it allows you to remove the fatigue, but also changes what the card did. And this is a decent area, but the problem is you don't do it that often. Depending on what character you are. The elf characters are basically called, and like the archer has basically inbuilt abilities that allow him to flip over his cards on a regular basis. So he's always doing the flipping and stuff. But other characters struggle with this. Even with that mechanic, it's not the most engrossing of things to do. Just like, oh, I can just flip over my card every now and again. You can set up some interesting combo turns with a melee weapon and a ranged weapon, say. Like, you know, you've got a ranged weapon, and then you move, and then you flip your card and go in for a melee strike. You know, that can be cool when you do it, but they don't happen as often as I would like, and flipping over your hero character sheet is mainly just what like little variation of ability you have. I never really felt that the mechanic was that great, and because it's not that difficult to implement, if you're playing this solo, you are meant to be only playing with 2 characters. I don't see why you couldn't play with a third if you're already that way inclined. Moving on to aesthetics, this is again hit and miss, and for a game that costs £130 or whatever it costs in your country, I don't think OK is good enough. The app looks great. The art style is very divisive. I'm fine with it, but I would have maybe preferred a different style. I know some people hate it, I know some people love it. It's definitely going to be an eye of the beholder, no D&D pun intended, you know, for this one. But the problem is that as much as I like the way the app looks, and I don't mind the artwork, the component quality is good, but the terrain is a bit of a hit and miss affair for me. It's 3D and you get to see it out on the board fine. You need to spend a good couple of hours assembling the rotten stuff when you buy the game though, I warn you of that. I spent a whole evening after work basically having to punch out all these cardboard bits and then assemble them all, a little chest here, a tree here, a multi-part dragon statue here. It's like, whew, takes a bit of time, and then you got to stuff it all in the box and hope it stays in one piece. But it's still not the best quality cardboard though that they use, especially with the treasure chest that you got to like fold over and then put together at the ends on so they stay together. they seem a little bit flimsy and a little bit like basic. But on top of that, the art style on the terrain is kind of what I would compare to a low texture RPG game from the 90s. It doesn't look very good at all. The underlays literally are just a flimsy little bit of a paper card that you slip underneath bits of terrain to create a lava pit or a poison area. It's like, poison area? What does poison area even mean? It's just like green underlay. I don't know, the water looks the best, but even then it's pretty basic. The rest of the terrain just looks really muted and bland though. The stone pillars and that are just basic grey. The grey floors don't look interesting. You know, various bits of terrain like bookcases and chests are fine, I don't mind that, and you get little weird extras like a little potion, cauldron thing. You get like a book, you know, evil book on a standing, like don't read those kind of things, you know, if you know what's good for you. And those are cool, like the little pieces here and there, but the big scale stuff, with the exception of that dragon statue, which is pretty cool, but the general room stuff that you build does look like low texture quality RPG stuff. And the game costs £130. This is not a cheap game, and it's not good enough to just be okay in this regard. If you want me to fork over a 3-digit sum of money for this game, that's not even a Kickstarter project, I need stuff to be like out of this world. I need stuff to be great. I have got games on, well, some of those games are in the bag from the convention I was at recently, but there are games on my shelf that cost less than this that I think are better produced. I mean, have you seen what Elf Creek Games puts out? You know, you gotta admit, you can do a lot with $40, but this is 130. It's a lot of cash, and for low texture quality terrain, I felt a little bit underwhelmed by that aspect, especially as I knew that I was going to have to spend ages assembling the rotten stuff as I was playing the game. You can tell that a lot of that price went into the app, which granted is the best thing about this game. You know, I want this app technology in other games. I just feel that the visual 3D terrain bit, could have been a little better quality. Now we get onto Immersion, and this is a hit and miss one as well. It definitely is thematic. It definitely puts you in that world. The 3D terrain is definitely a visual aid to suck you into whatever adventure it is, and I gotta applaud some of the design choices they made on some of the scenarios. There's one in particular that involved a dream state. I won't spoil anything from the story, but it basically involved a dream state where you kind of control two different aspects of a scenario at once, and the way it linked the two together I thought was pretty clever, even if the aesthetics of the 3D terrain didn't help to really bring that into the forefront. But I thought this was a cool idea, and little tricks like that they pull in some of the scenario design was definitely a plus point. It definitely feels like your typical dungeon crawl. Smash the door down, go and kill the dragon with your big glowy sword. You know, that is definitely represented here. Where this lacks a little bit though is the writing. This story is a pretty generic story with a lot of tropes that you've seen before in fantasy films or fantasy series, or even just like, you know, I mean, Gloomhaven's story wasn't particularly great, this isn't particularly great either, but the writing feels a little amateurish at times.
Say something stupid like, ooh, the power of love.
Yeah, these characters are written with the very basic tropes that you've seen before, and as I'm going through these scenarios, I mean, I've still got a few to finish off. There's 16 in the bags and I've done 10 or 11, I think, something like that. So I've still got about 5 or so to play. I'm not that fussed about what happens next though. There have already been plot twists that have happened, and in a really good film or a really good game that I'm invested in, I should be like, oh, you know, shock horror. And here I'm just like, that happened. Okay, fair enough. And there's a lot of reading you gotta do in this. When you're in between missions and you go in, like, the screen basically brings the characters and sort of highlights who's talking. So it's like, you know, as basically they all play red light, green light with the screen. But with this, you know, you read all their stuff and you can make silly voices when you're reading it as a group. When you're reading it solo, you're just reading the basic story. But there's a lot there to read, and it's not the best writing. If I play Tainted Grail or This War of Mine, that Days of the Siege campaign, oh, I love the stories in that. The Tainted Grail story and setting is so good and rich and dripping theme, the Arthurian legend style. The Days of the Siege campaign for This War of Mine is still one of my favourite campaigns I've ever played. The story is so gripping, the stuff that happens to you is like meaningful, you know, the choices feel meaningful, you know, everything has repercussions and you feel bad when stuff happens that doesn't go well for you. Here, You make story choices along the way, but you don't really notice a great deal of their impact. You usually get thrown up a couple of choices of in a speech, like, I wish to go take out this enemy because ... and then it will say, to avenge my fallen comrades, or because my new friends need it, or something like, you know. It gives you two choices, you pick one, and you keep doing that several times, and yes, it does have an impact, but you don't notice it a great deal. And certainly there's not a huge, like, oh my god, colossal difference between the two outcomes to make you think, oh, I can play this over again and I'm gonna get a totally different feeling character and story. So it didn't have enough impact for me. So Immersion, in the middle. It's a very basic story, kind of basic writing, but it does put you in the theme of the typical kick the door down and black monsters. And if that's all you're after and you don't really care about the story, then, well, you're in a good place here. So, longevity. You're paying £130 for this box, and you want it to last you a long time. Well, it's going to last you a long time to play through the campaign. I mean, 16 scenarios when it takes a minimum of 60 to 90 minutes just to play through a scenario solo, let alone if you're playing with other people. You could easily be getting, like, well, I mean, as a solo player, probably a good, I'd say, 25, 30 hours out of this game, I would say. As a solo player, you're going to get way more hours than that if you play multiplayer, just for how long the scenario takes. So you're definitely getting your money's worth in terms of the first campaign play. I'd be surprised if anybody wants to play through this campaign a second time though. The story is not gripping or varied enough in order to allow for repeat plays. Yes, you've got these minor differences that are done with those like choices I mentioned a minute ago, and you could choose different characters to play more often than others, but it's not different enough. I'm not going to play through a second time and get a completely different story compared to the first. Take Tainted Grail back as the other example. I played through it as a general goody two-shoes. Like, I'm going to be, you know, the savior, I'm going to be a nice person, you know, and I will side with these people as I go through. I could play through the same scenario with a different character, be evil as all get out, side with the evil characters at certain stages, and major changes will happen from the story to warrant a second playthrough. Here though, once you've played it, you're kind of done. And I'm not a big fan of that when it cost £130 in the first place. And the box has, where is it? Is it on this rulebook? I'm not picking up the whole box again. No, it's not there. Is it on this lid? Here we go. Yeah. See this phrase? Here we go. Act 1. Act 1. So they've already announced an expansion for this, I forget, Greyhawks or something or whatever, and that's going to be compatible with this terrain. So it's good that they're releasing more content, but an expansion means more money, more bucks. It's this Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth thing, you know, it's like, you've got your base box, now we got to pay extra for DLC campaign stuff. But then there'll be an Act 2 coming out at some point, which will no doubt probably be a box just as big as that, with different miniatures, different terrain, different stuff that you've got, which is probably going to be another £130 on top. So this game will have a lot of expandability over time, obviously, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to keep up with it. And how are you going to store it? You saw how big that box was when I held it at first. It takes up a good chunk of the top of a shelf here. It will take up an entire calyx square by itself, and yes, it will fit in one of those, but it'll be the only thing you shove in it. Can you imagine having 2 or 3 of those with the expansion stuff shoved in it? Whew, that would be a lot of storage space for it. But yeah, you're gonna play it once and be done really. You'll wait for the next expansion and then you'll kind of be done. So with my final summary, this is tough, because I have enjoyed my time playing this game, but I'm less inclined to want to get it back to the table to finish it off. I know I will finish it off, I promise you I'll finish it off, but I'm not as excited to do that, and that's a problem. I have enjoyed the time I've spent, but there have been things that have got in the way. You know, I like the idea of just kick the door down and kill stuff with weapons and that. I like leveling up characters in between missions, crafting different hilts for your swords and bows that allow you to do percentage chances of status effects and that. That's cool. I like the fact that the app is a technological achievement that brings musical immersion, as well as tracking a lot of the fiddly bookkeeping stuff. Great, but the chore of making all that terrain every game, is irritating. I pretty much just lay out a basic sheet with where the monsters are and leave it at that, really. I can't even be bothered to stick stuff on pillars and have staircases and all that stuff there, because it just takes ages to set it all up all the time. But on top of that, the flipping of the cards is fine, but nothing special. The writing is a bit amateurish, but again, not bad. But the scenarios do take a long time to play, so it's got a lot of negatives that aren't huge by themselves, but they do mount up. But then there's good stuff to say about it as well, but I'm gonna struggle to give this one a seal of endorsement, and I think my final verdict is gonna be a 6 out of 10 for Descent. I don't regret playing it. I think it's good. I think it's above average, above average style game, but I don't think for that price tag it's gonna win that many people over. A lot of fans didn't even want this game, really, but I feel that the hate train on this was not really deserved. But then I also feel that 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 is probably stretching the mark a little bit, because that's overlooking a lot of problems that this game has. But a lot of fans exist for this game, and that's fair enough. It's definitely enjoyable, but maybe you might want to wait for it to come down a little bit in price, or maybe get it as a group between you, like pay a bit of money each and then invest your time into it. But yeah, this isn't exactly the adventure game that's going to suddenly take over like 2021 and be the highlight of the year. I've played better games this year, and it just felt like a pretty expensive above average game, and for that price tag I don't want above average, I want blow my mind. This one doesn't do that. So that's my detailed review of Descent Legends of the Dark. Do you agree or disagree with my views? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, particularly with regards to paying a lot for the game itself and the expansions in future. Do you like the art style and the aesthetics, or did it not work for you? Do you prefer the second edition of Descent compared to this one? Have you played both? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'm interested to hear. That's it for this video. If you like what you see, please remember to leave a thumbs up. It means the world to me to know that you appreciate the content. Don't forget that the unofficial sponsor of this channel is Zatu.co.uk. If they've got it in stock and Descent is taking your eye, then perhaps buy it from them, fill a gap in your shelf, and get it at a decent cost. And if you want to check out more content on the channel, you can continue with my top 100 with the 50 to 41 segment, or you can listen to my latest podcast where I go on a little bit of ranting about the Dune board game in that show as well. So that's it from me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video, and remember, as always, it's only a game. Bye for now.